Welcome to the Mama Village podcast, your go-to resource for all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. From positive and informative stories to expert advice, this platform is designed to help you feel informed and remove fear as you journey through motherhood. Join this community as we share stories that warm the heart and expert insights that inform the mind. I'm your host, Ellen. Before we delve into today's episode, the Mama Village would like to take a moment to acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the land in which we gather, work and share these stories across many lands in Australia. The Mama Village recognises the traditional custodians of the land and recognises their enduring connection to this country and extends our respects to elders past, present and emerging. It is important to recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women cultivated a profound connection between birthing and the land. For generations, these communities have woven birth stories into the fabric of their cultural identity, creating a tapestry of knowledge that transcends time. As we explore birth stories and education, we acknowledge the importance of preserving and revitalising traditional birthing culture, recognising the profound impact it has had on the understanding of birth as a sacred and deeply spiritual experience. Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Mama Village. I'm your host Ellen and today I have the privilege of sitting down with two incredible private midwives, Tarlia and Jacinta from Avenir Life Midwifery. Tarlia and Jacinta delve into the importance of promoting birth physiology and biological functioning. They shed light on the transformative power of giving birth at home, where mothers not only feel held and nurtured, but also powerful as they are the absolute decision makers in their bodies, babies, and their birth. Where 1 in 3 women experience birth trauma in Australia, Tarlia and Jacinta explain how home birth promotes a positive birth experience, allowing mothers to envision and plan the birth of their dreams. We also talk about how birthing at home frees mothers from the hospital timelines and highlights the extensive support provided to mothers and families postpartum, emphasising the importance of ongoing care beyond the traditional hospital model. Through their personalised approach, Tarlia and Jacinta normalise childbirth, instilling a deep sense of trust in one's own instincts and anatomy. They also emphasise the importance of holding space for the mother as they embark on this sacred journey of pregnancy, birth and postpartum. I'm incredibly proud of this episode and I can't wait for you to listen, so settle in and prepare to be inspired as we explore the powerful world of home birth with Tarlia and Jacinta from Avenir Life Midwifery. Don't forget that if you like the podcast, please subscribe and leave a comment and review. Now let's get into today's episode. Welcome to the Mama Village.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Can you please start by introducing yourselves? So who you are, a bit about your families, where you're from, and all about your holistic midwifery practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I can start. So I'm Tarlia. I am a mum to 3 beautiful children. I've got a daughter, 10, whose name is Ava, and a son, Raphael, who's 5, and my littlest one is Sophia, who's 3. I've been a midwife for 13 years now, and I am currently living in a caravan travelling around Australia with my family. So we've been in our van travelling for 13 months now. So yeah, we're still planning to be on the road for the next sort of year on and off, coming home in between. So I'm mostly on the phones behind the scenes of our business doing stuff for Avenir Life, and then you'll see me around the place doing some seconds for home births as well. I was born and raised on the Gold Coast, and it was actually my auntie who suggested to me that I would be a great midwife when I was 17. And I was always fascinated with pregnancy and birth from when I was quite young. So I read lots of books about it and just found the whole process fascinating. I was from a really big family, and my mum's brothers and sisters had a whole bunch of children, and so there was always someone pregnant around me. So I was always reading and trying to find out things about it. And then my sister had her first baby when I was quite young. So we decided that she wanted me to come in with her for her birth. And I think that really sparked a fire in me and made me realise that was what I wanted to do with my life. So I went on to study and was at the birth of her other 2 children as well. And then I've gone on to have 3 beautiful water births myself. And I think, I just truly believe in the power that women have when it comes to birth. And I'm super passionate about education, particularly in the postnatal space. So, I just love love that whole area and just feel that it's a bit underrated. So, you know, I guess one of the big things for me in Avenir Life is making sure that women are not only supported for pregnancy and birth, but postpartum as well. And I think when Avenir Life was formed, I knew I wanted to work alongside someone. And for me, Jacinta was just the obvious choice. We've worked together in the hospital, and I think our values and our desires to improve choices for women align really well. So, yeah, there's no one else I'd rather be sharing this journey with than her. So, yeah, that's me.
Oh, that's a gorgeous story.
Thanks, Talia.
So, Jacinta, do you want to tell us about yourself?
Of course. So I'm Jacinta and I have two daughters myself. I have a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old. I too was traveling in a caravan, packed up the house and kids and left. And then we came back to see some family for Christmas. And then I think I just came, after chatting with Talia, it just seemed like the most logic thing that now that I was home, that I stayed home while this sort of got off the ground. But we still live in our van. We're still sort of moving around. We're just on the Gold Coast, but still living in the van. So don't know how we'll go back moving into a house now that we've been living on top of each other for so long. But I have been a midwife for 10 years, and I actually had my daughter quite young. I was 19, and I just had a really beautiful experience, and I had a really beautiful midwife. And I remember after the birth sort of thinking about her, and I thought about her for a long time. And I even remember wanting to write her a letter, and she just cared for me in such a way that, yeah, it had a really big impact on everything. And then my daughter was a few months old when I decided that that's what I would do. I would go and become a midwife because I guess I wanted to have that same impact on women. And yeah, so I started my degree, and then I had my second daughter at the end of my degree as a new midwife, and she was an unplanned home birth. She came super, super fast, like half an hour from start to finish. So I had her at home, and I think that was for me, that was a point where I think that just sort of paved the way in terms of how I practice as a midwife and how I view birth and trust women and trust their ability to birth. Because for me, I mean, my body just took over. It was such an instinctive sort of process, and there was no one telling me to do anything. My body was just doing what it needed to do, and it was a really amazing experience. And so I continued to work in the hospital and gain experience and confidence, but I still had this sort of fire that I knew that we could do this better, and I knew that women could birth, and they did birth better at home. And I started sort of dipping my toes into the home birth space, and that was when I was a really sort of, okay, this is what I need to do. And then, I mean, with Talia and I both on the road, and we were chatting while we were both on the road, we thankfully sort of backed each other, and we've gone into this together, which is, yeah, like Talia said, I think we're a great team. And it's funny, every time I have an idea, I'll message Talia and she's like, I thought of that too, or like vice versa. She'll call me and she's like, how about we do this? And I'm like, I was about to call you and tell you the same thing. So we're on the same page, and I'm just so excited. I think the home birth space is gaining more awareness and traction, and I think women are really questioning, I guess, the standard practice, and they're thinking like, oh, I do have options. And I think the more of us that are coming into this space, the better outcomes we'll see for mothers and babies.
Oh, that's also a beautiful story. I'm loving this. So what services do you offer, and what are your service areas?
Yeah, so we offer a full range of services, including midwifery, continuity of care. Our focus is obviously on home birth, but we do offer hospital support, like hospital birth support as well. We don't have visiting rights at any of the hospitals on the Gold Coast, so we can't act as the primary carer in that situation, but we can definitely still do all of the woman's antenatal and postnatal care, and then we're there for the birth as a support role. And then we do one-off antenatal and postnatal care, childbirth education classes, and then we work with a range of allied health professionals who we love. So we've got a lactation consultant, we've got an acupuncturist who specializes in fertility and pregnancy and postpartum acupuncture. And she does some beautiful services where she incorporates facials and things into that acupuncture treatment, which is beautiful. We have an amazing women's health physio, Zara, who works with us. We're running a free education workshop with her in March, so that's very exciting. We have a perinatal psychologist who works specifically with women post birth and in relation to birth trauma from previous births, so she's amazing too. We have a beautiful naturopath, hypnobirthing practitioner, and also a nutritionist who works specifically with pregnant and postpartum women, helping them with things like depletion and stuff like that, just to help with their nutritional status. So yeah, we offer a whole range of services, and at the moment we're servicing all of the Gold Coast, northern New South Wales, like the Northern Rivers area, and then the south side of Brisbane.
Wow. I didn't realize that your practice was so all encompassing because I had a list of all the professionals that I think women, obviously, if they can afford it, really should engage or see and talk with. And
Yeah.
you've literally ticked off every single box.
Yeah, I think part of the dream of starting Avenir Life was to try and make a space where women could have access to all and everything that they may possibly need. I think that it's super important to, as a mum myself as well, it just for people to not have to go and search far and wide to find a good qualified person who can help them in whatever area, because I think pregnancy and birth and postpartum is about so much more than just a midwife and a woman. There is so many other services that mesh and link in with that whole experience. So yeah, I think that, our dream was to try and make a space where women could get everything that they needed in the one spot.
And I really like that you're doing the antenatal classes as well. Like that's part of the service that you offer. I think that's really great because I just think a lot of the confidence that women can gain is just from education and knowledge. So I love that you're doing that side of things as well. So what drove you to establish your own holistic midwifery group practice, and how does it reflect your values and commitment to positive birth experiences?
Well, for me, I think it was after working in the hospital, for so many years, I was really awake to just, I guess, the flaws in the system. It's busy, there are time constraints, and I worked across all areas. I did some antenatal stuff. I did a lot of I worked a lot in the birthing suite. I also worked home visiting, so I was out in the communities, and it was just when I was speaking to women and I was involved in their care, and I was listening to stories of women coming in, and I just knew that there was so many gaps. And women at the end of the day were, I guess, suffering because of that. And so, it just became really obvious that it was having a negative impact. And like you said, when women don't get that education, they don't get that time, they don't have that confidence. And so for me, like the main drive in this was just creating a service where women had someone that had that time for them and that trust in them and was able to sort of bring out that confidence in them. And when we're working with women, we're working with them in their homes, where providing support and care in a place that they feel comfortable. And because of that, I think it really enables them to start making some choices that they feel comfortable making, that feel right with them, that sit right with them. So we spend a lot of time antenatally, I guess, getting them to really listen to their intuition, because at the end of the day, that's what's most important. And in a busy hospital and sometimes in busy clinics, that just doesn't happen. And of course, we both knew that we need more midwifery services in our area. It's just the private midwives working at the moment are extremely booked out. Some of them are booked out months in advance, and it just goes to show that there is a need and there's women missing out because there just isn't the midwives out there. So that was a really big drive for me. It was just, we need to get this service up and running. We need to get out there and we need to start, supporting women, because at the end of the day, we know that continuity of care improves outcomes. It's the research is everywhere. So
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that the more education and knowledge that gets out there about home births and, some people don't even know that you could hire a private midwife. I didn't know when I had
yeah,
my first child. So,
yeah.
and I think, I can't remember the exact statistics, but home birth is really low. Like I know it's under 5%. I don't know if you know the statistics off the top of your head.
I think it's 0.2%,
Yeah,
3%.
there you
Yeah,
go.
yeah,
There you
yeah,
go. It's really, really low. And I think with the more home births that we start to see and start to happen, there's going to be even more demand for private midwifery services. So I love that you're doing this. I think this is really great.
yeah. We're pretty excited about it.
So what do you often find are the primary motivations that lead individuals or families to choose a home birth? So are there common themes or personal reasons that you've observed?
I guess most commonly it is, just a desire to avoid intervention. I think women do hear horror stories. I think they're out there, and I don't even really like to use the word horror, like maybe more traumatic, but they just have this desire to birth without intervention. Some of the time it comes down to previous births and women who have gone through sort of standard maternity systems and sort of had that routine GP care and birthed in the hospital with an unfamiliar midwife. And, there were aspects of that birth that I guess they didn't like or they want to do different next time. So I think that plays a big part. It is previous experiences and wanting to avoid the same thing from happening. I think too, there's just some women who are really in tune with themselves and they want to feel in control. They want that freedom of movement. They want to protect their space and their emotional safety. So I think there's a lot of factors that come into play, but I would say most commonly it's just women wanting minimal intervention. They just want to be in their space and be left alone and just to do their
Yeah.
thing.
And would you say that the desire for minimal intervention could be a contributing factor in the sense that with the birth trauma rates at the moment, I
Yeah,
mean, 1 in 3 women suffer from birth trauma,
huge.
and a lot of that is to do with medical intervention.
Yeah.
Um, and so do you think that women who are seeking no medical intervention and a physiological birth are coming from that place where they're aware of birth trauma or past traumas?
Oh, absolutely. And I think when women are sharing their stories with each other, I think definitely there is a lot of information now out there about birth trauma, and people are talking about birth trauma. There's inquiries happening all around Australia around
Mm.
birth trauma. And, if we think 1 in 3 women are walking away from their birth with some kind of trauma, I mean, we have to look at the lifelong impact that has in terms of their bonding with their baby and the family dynamic and them falling, going on to have another baby. And I definitely think that is a big motivation, that women don't want to be that statistic. They don't want to be placing themselves in a place where that is a statistic and that is what's happening. So, definitely.
So how does home birth allow for a more individualized birthing experience?
Well, I think that birthing at home allows the women to be totally in charge of their birthing journey and their choices. I think by choosing home birth, it means that they're going to have a team of people around them who are working with them for months from the very start of their pregnancy all the way through until 6 weeks after their baby's born. And I think when you have that relationship with someone, you get to know their desires and their dreams for their birth. And I think, by that happening, it allows those people who you've invited into that space to really, enable that to happen, or help you to make that happen. I think as a midwife, home birth allows us to get to know the woman and her family and their children, and having them all present during their birth. It just gives the space and the time to make choices and decisions that might otherwise be rushed or forced in a different setting. Like in hospital settings, everything's on a time frame because they have to, for funding reasons and all of this sort of stuff. So you're on a timeline as soon as you arrive there in your labor, and that sets a trajectory of things and a cascade of interventions to happen, all because it's this strict, we've got to keep to this time. Whereas I think that by birthing in your home, it gives you an individualized experience because it allows you more time and more space to make those decisions that feel right for you. And I think at the heart of it, I guess, it just allows the woman and her family to be doing what they feel is comfortable and right at the time without interference or pressure from anyone else.
Mm. And on that too, my understanding is, I mean, my sister's a midwife and my mum's a nurse. Not only do they have their hospital timeframes and procedures and protocols that they have to abide by, but they're also really stretched. They're understaffed,
Absolutely.
and so
Yep.
everything is, super pace, or needs to be super pace for them.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's so true.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you spoke about this a little bit already, but let's get into it in a bit more detail. How does home birth promote a sense of autonomy during the birthing process? And can you provide examples of how that can positively influence the overall birth experience?
So, in terms of like this setting, during pregnancy, I often discuss with women and encourage them to really envision their birth. So, I get them to write down when they think about their dream birth, I get them to write down what they see, what they hear, what they feel, what they smell. And so we get to create that space. So, this is everything that they is coming to them, all these little signs and these feelings about what they want that space to feel like and look like is all on them, and they have the ability to create that space. So when we're thinking about the home birth setting and autonomy, it's every decision is essentially the woman's. She is choosing where she would like to birth her baby, where she would like to set up the pool if that's what she's wanting. She gets to decide if she wants to move from the shower or the bath. She gets to decide if she wants to go and lay in her bed and rest for a few hours or walk to the kitchen and grab something to eat and drink. Autonomy is just having that power to make those decisions. And that's achievable in a home birth setting because there is no constraints. I mean, the woman's in her home and she's making the call. She's making the shots. We're there to support her decisions. That's our role. And, we do a lot of prep in the antenatal period on how to create that environment. And I think really like manifesting it is a great way to start. I truly get them to just sit and envision them birthing their baby and what is coming up for them, like where are they, who is around them, is the room dark. So then they feel really in control. They feel like they've made all of these decisions and they're birthing how they envisioned that they would birth. So yeah, I think when that happens, then we know they have more positive outcomes. There's a level of satisfaction, and even if a transfer is required, up until that point, everything that's happened in that space is the woman's choice, and she's making those decisions. And if she decides to transfer, then that again is her decision. And a lot of the research does show it's not so much the outcome, it's about how the woman felt throughout the whole experience. So yeah, I think just being in a home birth setting and having that autonomy and having that control and power and freedom to make those choices absolutely improves outcomes. It makes for a more positive experience, and women are more satisfied. We absolutely know that. So
Oh, you've detailed that so beautifully. And I think all that preparation work too, I imagine if a hospital transfer was decided by the
yeah,
woman, that they could take that knowledge and that autonomy with them to the hospital and know more about what choices they can make, what decisions they can make, and steps that they can go through in that decision-making process as well, like asking for time to discuss it with their birthing person or their birth keeper, not
yeah,
automatically jumping to the recommendation given by the healthcare provider in hospital. They still can take that autonomy with them in a way to the hospital
totally.
if that
Yeah.
hospital transfer happens. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think when you prepare them and you bring that inner knowing back to them through their entire pregnancy, they do come into birth with a sense of confidence and trust. They trust their body, they trust their intuition. I think when you go through a standard maternity system, and you might see a GP and you might see a different midwife every visit, those people aren't building up that confidence in you. I mean, they're probably doing some routine checks and sending you on your way, and you then start to lose those little pieces of you. I guess you start taking the advice of all these different people, and that inner trust and that inner knowing starts to sort of go away. Essentially, it gets buried. But when you're in a service where your provider is giving you that confidence and that power and supporting you to trust those instincts, like you said, it just, if they transfer, they've gone into it, they've got so much confidence in their bodies that they can ask questions, and they can ask, is this necessary, and no, that's not what I want. So yeah, I think that prep is super important.
And so, in a home birth setting, how does that familiar and comfortable environment really positively influence the emotional and physical aspects of labour?
Well, I think it's like important to understand the physiology of labor, to answer this question. But at the essence of it all, labor is essentially controlled by our brain and the hormones in our body. So when we're in a situation where we feel uneasy or stressed, our body's going to produce a hormone called cortisol and also adrenaline, and both of these hormones basically will kill off our oxytocin. So, oxytocin is our love hormone. It's what our body needs to birth our babies. And this is how our labor begins and everything, by our body producing oxytocin. But when we're in a situation where our body becomes stressed or worried or anxious about something, then all of a sudden our oxytocin is just kicked off by the cortisol. And then what you tend to see is a, I guess, a stalling of labor, because the hormone levels that should be happening aren't happening because of the situation that the woman finds themselves in. So I think that, we'll often see women laboring beautifully in the early stages of labor at home. And then what happens is they get to a point where they think, oh, okay, I I can't, I need to go to the hospital now, or whatever the case may be. And so they will go and get in the car, and then they'll drive to the hospital. And then when you get to that point, all of a sudden the beautiful hormones that were present in their own safe space at home, where it was dark and quiet and familiar, become a public car park, walking from their car all the way through, across a bridge into the hospital, seeing all these random unfamiliar people, and then having to go to a birth suite and answer questions about what your name is and when your due date is and do you have your book, and then get left to wait, in a waiting room while somebody comes to see you. And then you go to a different room which is bright lights and monitors and sounds and all of these things. And all of the research shows and suggests that our body doesn't cope very well with that in labor, because our brain just wants to be in a very like subconscious mode and just being able to concentrate on what we're doing. And when we have all of these external influences, all of this noise and questions and all of these things, our brain can't stay in that subconscious state. So I guess it just throws off the whole hormonal balance. And so, when you have someone who's birthing at home, it helps with the positive emotional and physical responses, because the body is in its own safe space. You're in your home. There is no external influences. There is usually no increasing levels of cortisol or adrenaline because you're in a space that feels safe and comfortable to you. It smells familiar. You have access to your own clothes, to your own food. You can move around how you want. There's no restrictions or anything. So I think that it just allows the body and mind to not have to think or worry, about anything other than birthing your baby, which is what it needs to do in that scenario.
Yeah, and I've been through that firsthand. A bit of backstory with my second baby, I really wanted a home birth, but I didn't learn about home birth until very late in pregnancy. And, we talked about before availability of midwives at that point. There was just no one available. So I ended up going through the hospital, but I didn't leave until the last second. And I knew that the bright lights and all those sorts of things would turn my logical thinking brain on and stress me out. So I put an eye mask on, the earphones, and I was like, clamped my eyes shut, no one.
Perfect.
And I roared through that hospital. I went through emergency with my husband pushing me, like he was mortified, but I just did not. I was like, I can't keep the eyes closed. But then, as soon as I got there, they were like, let's take your obs. What's your blood pressure? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And that nearly snapped me out of it. And luckily I was so far advanced, I think, at that point. As soon as I stood up out of the wheelchair, the pushing started. So I was lucky. But yeah, I have experienced firsthand how important it is to stay in the zone for labor to advance. And
absolutely.
So let's talk about flexibility and freedom of movement, because in a hospital, you're usually in a birthing room. Some are quite small, and you're often, we were just talking about checks and things like that, where they'll require you often to lie on your back on a bed, and you don't get as much, freedom to move around as you need, and positioning and all those sorts of things. So can you talk about how flexibility and freedom of movement during labour in a home birth can help progress labour and contribute to that positive birth experience?
Well, I think it goes back to everything that Talia was saying about the hormonal side of things. And when you're in a familiar space and you have the freedom to, like I said before, go and take a shower, or go and lie in your bed, and your bed feels comfortable, it feels familiar, it smells like you and maybe your partner or your dog. So all of those things will help produce oxytocin, and that is the hormone that powers the labor. That is what helps things progress. And so having the freedom to do what feels right, and in a space that feels familiar, will just allow that oxytocin to do what it needs to do. And most of the time in a home birth, we don't need to check, we don't need to do anything. We might listen into the baby, but it's always at the woman's choice, and it's something that we've had a chance to speak about in the pregnancy. So when these things pop up, she's aware of what's happening, she's in control of what's happening. She might like to stand while things are being done, or sit on her comfortable couch that she loves. And I think just all of those things, it really comes back to how birth is mainly hormonal. I mean, our bodies mechanically will do all of these wonderful things, but at the end of the day, it's our hormones and what hormones are being released that have an impact on labor progression. And we know, and they're in a familiar space with familiar people, that oxytocin can do exactly what it needs to do.
Yeah. I've had guests on in the past that have said when they've reached a certain point of labour that intuitively they've just felt the need to do like a massive lunge in the shower or something like that. And those are the sorts of things, when you're at home, you're able to do. You can really feel what your body needs and positions that they need to be in that moment. And you're not listening to, external forces. Someone might be coming in for checks that, rounds of observations like we were talking before, or they might want to do vaginal examinations, whatever the protocol and procedure is. So, you really have that freedom of movement in a home birth and comfortability too.
Yeah. And women, like you said, women will get in these crazy positions because their body just knows, like, this is the space I need to make, and this is what I need to do. And like it's quite incredible some of the stuff that I've seen women do at that last minute of getting their babies out. But that's exactly what we're talking about. It's just having the freedom to do that. And there's no, you have to be here and you have to do this and you have to be in this position because it's easier for the midwife. There's none of that. It's really the woman she's the decider in absolutely everything.
It's exactly how it should be, and I
Yeah.
absolutely love that. So we talked a little bit about continuity of care and how all the research shows that continuity of care is really, the gold standard. So, but can you talk a little bit about why and how it contributes to that positive birthing experience?
Yeah, I think that anyone who has used this model of care would agree. And like you said, it is backed up by the research suggesting that continuity of midwifery care is the gold standard of care. I think that when you have a relationship with someone and you build trust with them, it means that you have more trust and confidence in yourself. Like, it allows you to explore options that feel right for you without the fear of judgment or being denied something that you wish for. I think it allows women to be respected and heard, and all of that obviously contributes to a positive birth experience. I think I've looked after women in this model of care who haven't even ended up with their ideal birth outcome, what they may have thought or planned, but when you speak to them afterwards, they still will express that they feel positive about the whole experience. And like I've supported some women who they have ended up with in my mind, what I would consider a less than ideal outcome in the end, and then spoken to them afterwards. And one particular woman that I cared for, I remember talking to her and just saying, like, are you okay with how it all went? And and trying to sort of debrief with her a little bit about the birth. And I still so clearly remember her saying to me, honestly, she's like, I just think it was so amazing. Like, I know it wasn't exactly what we planned, but she's like, I just felt like I was so supported and so heard the whole time, and I felt like we got to do it on my terms. And she's like, I feel so proud of myself that I was able to push through everything that we did and get to the end, with a healthy baby. And it was just really beautiful to hear that, even though she didn't get what would be deemed the perfect birth, that she was still so happy and content with what had happened, all because of the relationship that was built and the trust that she had. And I guess that our ability to work as a team in a less than ideal situation, she had to transfer to hospital, but she still was able to make the choices that she wanted to make because she was in a situation where she'd been prepared for months and months for this birthing journey. And I think, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. Like, regardless of how the actual birth ends up, it's not just about the birth. Like, obviously the birth is a huge pivotal moment, and it is one that you'll never ever forget. But I think that the journey is about so much more than just the birth. And I think that if you have amazing care providers that walk you through that whole journey and you have that relationship, it really changes that whole thing for you. Like, I've been so lucky to have had amazing midwives look after me for my birth, for my 3 pregnancies. And like, they're just people who I absolutely adore and are still super close friends with to this day. And, I'm just so thankful for the opportunity to have been cared for by them, because they really do change the situation for you and just allow a safe space. Like, I was a midwife for all of my births, but I used to go to my midwives and say, oh, I've got this question, like, and ask something, feeling like an idiot, and they'd be like, no, don't be silly, like, you're a mum, you're not a midwife right now. So I think having that relationship and that trust with your care provider just makes so much difference to the whole process. And I struggle, I've worked across lots of different areas and, in the private sector and in the public sector. And I struggle to see any other model of care that matches the care that you get from midwifery continuity of care.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. And back to what you were saying, it's more than about the birth. I think we're really learning now that it's really we always hear this phrase, healthy baby, but we're learning more and more that it's actually so important about how the woman has felt throughout her
Absolutely.
experience and
Yeah.
whether she has felt in control of the decisions that she's made and informed. And that is what can really contribute to birth trauma as well, is the women or woman feeling out of control. So yeah, we're learning more and more about how it just goes so much, it's so beyond a healthy baby
Yes.
now. Like obviously we all
Yeah,
want a healthy
definitely.
baby. That's not what I'm saying. It's also about how the
Yeah.
woman feels. So how does the home birth setting allow for the involvement of siblings in the birthing process? I'm really curious about this one because if we went back for a third baby, I'm thinking in my head, oh, would I have my other children there? So can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think that, having a home birth and having care with a midwife in your home, like not only does it allow the siblings to be present at the birth if that's your choice, but it allows them to be involved in the whole pregnancy care. It's not just, again, it's not just about that one day where you have a baby. It's involving them through the whole process. And I think that this is so important because we're actually exposing the next generation of mothers and fathers to the fact that birth is normal and natural. And I think that that's so lacking these days. Like when you think back to our grandmother's
Yeah.
generation, most of them had home births as standard. It wasn't seen as crazy or strange or, anything like that. It was just what they did. They had lots of, like my grandmother has 7 children and they were all born at home. That was just the normal. All the siblings were there. It was just part of their life. And I think somehow we've stepped away from that. And now we have a generation of people who are influenced by TV and movies and medicine instead of the fact that birth is a normal physiological process that happens. And I think, one particular client that I remember who was having a home birth, it was her second pregnancy, and she had a 4-year-old daughter, and she was there for, all of the appointments and everything. And I think that I just made a really conscious effort to involve her in the care. So she used to, every visit, she loved the Doppler. And so she used to take the Doppler and we would put some gel in her mum's tummy and she would be the one who would find the baby's heartbeat. And she was, it was just such a little proud moment for her. Her little face would light up every time you'd see, like, she'd be like, oh, it's the baby, and it was just really sweet. And then when her mum had the baby, she went into labor and it was just so beautiful because her little girl was just so present and knowing in that situation. Like she just knew exactly what to say to her mum at the right times, like just in these little words of encouragement or like, it's okay, mummy. And she would stroke her on the head and, she was rubbing her back and it was just like the most beautiful thing. And I think, like it just really highlights that even though sometimes you might think, oh, it might be too scary for them or whatever, like at the end of the day, it's normal. And I think that, in a normal situation, in a normal setting, that it can be something that instills generational confidence in birth and the fact that birth is normal. And I think that is just such a valuable thing. Like, I think for me, one of my biggest regrets with my last birth is that my eldest daughter was 7 and she said to me, like, I really want to come and see the baby being born. And the time that I ended up going into labor at like 3:00 in the morning or something just wasn't the right time. We had said to her, if we can make it work, you can come. And then, I went into labor at 3:00 in the morning and she was born by 5:00. And so we just couldn't make it work with taking her. But it's one thing that I look back on and I regret now because I think I wish that I had have just woken her up and brought her with me. Like if I could turn back time, it would be the one thing that I would change about that birth was just allowing her to be there. And look, she's seen the birth video and all of that sort of stuff. And as having a mum as a midwife, birth is pretty normal for her anyway. But yeah, I just think it's such a valuable thing that can really instill lifelong confidence in our next generation for, the fact that birth is normal. So
well, you've got me convinced. If we went back for a third baby, I think I'd want to include. I always said no, like I think it would be too much. But I love that statement of it's breeding this next generation of people that really understand birth is normal.
yeah.
And Yeah, and it's not a medical emergency. So you spoke a little bit about how your services include antenatal classes. Is that separate to, say, if a mum hires you as a private midwife? Because this is leading into the question of, how do you utilize education to help expecting parents make informed decisions about home birth?
The classes are different. I mean, in saying that, we do a lot of education. The classes are more of like a group type thing where we can have a couple of families come along and provide that information to all of them in a group setting. But in saying that, we really allocate time for each appointment to go over a lot of the physiology of birth and what to expect in pregnancy and how to plan for your postpartum and all of those things. So we run the classes separately to sort of the appointment stuff, but essentially, it's all the same information. And what we're trying to do is just empower families and educate them and provide them with options and things like that for a better experience. But I also like to really include the research because there is some really great research out there. And I had an example of a woman in the hospital system wanting a vaginal birth after she'd had a cesarean. And, there was stuff that was being said to her and she was coming away from the appointments thinking like, is that right? Like, is that the statistic? And all I had to do was point her in the direction of where to look. And when she started looking at the research, she was able to take that back into her appointments and say, well, actually, this is what this says. And, so we provide them with that tool as well, how to research these things, how to go and find the evidence out there and know how to, I guess, read through that and take what they need from that. And I think also in terms of education, it's about, and we've spoken about this earlier, it's about encouraging women to also listen to their intuition. It's really powerful. And sometimes it's not, that the answer's there. It's that they're being told something that doesn't sit right. It's getting information from someone that makes them go, hang on a minute, like, is that right? Do I fall into that category? Are there other options? And so when you educate them to listen to that instinct or that gut feeling, then they're able to go out and do that research and sort of get that extra sort of backup, I suppose, when making decisions. So education, I think, covers a whole range of things, research and positioning and the stages of labor and even things as simple as anatomy. Like we have a pelvis and we have a baby, and I like to show women the pelvis. I like to show them the muscles surrounding the pelvis and how to help relax those muscles, and looking even at the perineum and becoming familiar with their own anatomy. Some women aren't even familiar with their own anatomy. So yeah, we're really big on education, and I think we try and incorporate a range of options when it comes to educating women. There's a lot of amazing books that I recommend and podcasts, and yeah, I think it's just about providing women with the options and them knowing there's heaps out there. It's just where to look for it.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to unpack from what you just said. One of the things that came out to me was, when you had that woman, I presume she went to hospital about the VBAC and asked a
Yeah.
question. I think a lot of the language that healthcare providers and hospitals use can sound quite scary. So she might have, I don't know what she was told, but she could have been told something like, if you do it this way, this is your risk. And then
Yeah.
if you choose this option, your risk doubles,
Yeah.
when that doubling effect could be from 0.1% to 0.2%. So in the scheme of things, it's actually
Smaller.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
How we present risk. And I was reading a study they've done the other day, and they actually did a study on this, and it was how we present risk to women absolutely affects how they make a decision. And so in the study, they actually spoke about if you said to somebody you have a 9 out of 10 chance that you would, win a prize if you enter this competition, or a 1 chance that you would lose, like, you're more likely, when you're presented with the risk that's a bit more positive, you're more likely to choose that. So it's being really careful. Like you said, when you say to a woman that your risk doubles, their mind is thinking, oh, that's huge, that's a massive increase. But what they need to look at is, like you said, that percentage. They need to look at, okay, the risk is 0.1%, and a doubling of that means it's a 0.2%. So yeah, in that case, actually, that's exactly what happened. It was that her risks doubled, and that she would need all this extra monitoring, and it just wasn't the case. When she went and did the research, she was able to look at the statistics, she was able to look at those risk factors, and then she was able to make a decision that she based off the research. So, yeah, really important.
Yeah, and just pointing women in the right direction of where they
Yeah.
can find the facts and the statistics themselves will just be making a massive difference in their lives. Like
Yeah.
you're really changing their path and preventing trauma. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So let's jump into postpartum. How does the transition to postpartum life differ when the birth takes place at home?
I think transition to postpartum life is so much easier when you birth at home for a few reasons. I think the main one is that you obviously never have to leave your home. So that in itself makes the transition for the mother and the baby and the whole family so much better, because the baby particularly never knows any different. It's, that you'll usually see that the babies are really settled and happy because they're not being moved from pillar to post. They just, are where they became, and they started there from the very beginning, and they're born there and they continue on there. So I think that obviously just makes that transition so much smoother. And for the mum, it means that she has her own bed, her own shower, her own clothes. She can walk around butt naked if she wants to, and she doesn't have to have the fear of someone walking into her room unannounced, or someone turning on lights, or taking her blood pressure, or all of the other things that tend to happen in hospital, having to share a room with someone else potentially and their crying baby. It allows time for breastfeeding to evolve naturally. It gives the family time to bond as a unit rather than mummy being away in a hospital for a week. And, I think situations like that sometimes, where mum goes and has a baby in a hospital and then doesn't come home for a week, I feel like that can sometimes set off an attitude of disconnection and jealousy towards the new baby from other siblings and stuff like that, because instead of being, again, going back to this whole thing of being involved in the process and understanding what's going on, and that little baby being born and just being part of the family, because that's just what happened. Mummy had a baby at home, and here's our new baby sibling. It's like, all of a sudden mummy disappears and goes to hospital for a week, and we don't get to see her. And those little things, particularly in certain age groups, like 2 to 3 year olds, when they can't fully understand what's happening there, can really impact how those other children bond with the baby and how they feel about that, because it's so much for them to deal with anyway, trying to adjust to a new family member. So yeah, I think that it just, by being at home, everything just sort of tends to flow so much more easily. Like, my 3 babies were born in the birthing center at the hospital, but I went home 4 hours after birth, and honestly, I couldn't wait to get home. Like, I was like, "Yep, oh, is my time up yet? Let's get out of here." And as soon as I got home, it was like, "Oh, this is so much better." Like, just everything was settled, and I had my own space and my own bed, and it was just so nice. So yeah, I think that birthing at home means that you're usually also going to have a midwife or a doula who's supporting you regularly during that first 6 weeks, rather than just getting 2 visits by an unknown midwife who comes and sees you from the hospital, and then you kind of left to fend for yourself. Like, there's just so many different factors that mean that having a birth at home and having continuity of care just automatically usually will translate into a smoother and more seamless transition into postpartum.
And I think that leads into, so what are your support services for women postpartum? Because you did mention that if you were going through a hospital, you would have 2 visits from an unknown midwife, which is so true. I've been through that, but I think I only had 1 visit actually. So it's very minimal. So let's talk about what support services you offer for women postpartum.
So for women that we are supporting, they in that first week they get a visit sort of within that first 24 hours. So we're sort of, if we're there the next day, just checking in on mum and baby, and then we see them again sort of 48 hours later, day 3, and then normally day 5, and then it's every week for 6 weeks. So, and we're also on call. We stay on call for them in that postpartum period as well. So if they're having issues with anything, that they've got someone that they can call or send a message to, and we can provide advice over the phone or even just pop in and see how they're doing. So absolutely, I mean, they get far more check-ins with a private midwife than the standard system. But also, like, Tyler and I are both super passionate about holding the mother in the postpartum period. And I think as a society, the postpartum tends to be quite infant focused. And a lot of the checks are, is baby feeding? Is baby weeing? Is baby pooing? How's the umbilical cord? It's very much how is the baby doing, and not so much how is the mother doing. And we, when we had this idea, we both knew that our huge, I guess, passion was going into postpartum. I mean, the birth is huge and pregnancy is huge, but postpartum is a long time, and so I think if women are really supported in those first couple of weeks, then they will go on and have and feel better in themselves, and they recover better. And we use a lot of the traditional Chinese ways of healing. I'm huge on Ayurvedic traditions where we warm the mother with meals. We know that pregnancy is a warm state with extra blood volume and, an occupied uterus with the baby. And once she births, according to Ayurvedic beliefs, the woman enters quite a cold state and their vata energy is unbalanced. And to bring them back into balance, we need to warm them. So we warm them through meals like soups and broths and teas. They really encourage keeping the feet warm, so wearing warm socks. They really support the use of belly binding, binding the belly and warming the uterus with oils. So we try to incorporate all of that and educate women on all of that so that they can truly, I guess, surrender to postpartum and be nurtured the way that they need to be nurtured. And I say to women all the time, you need to be nurtured in the same way that your baby is being nurtured. And your job is to look after your baby. And it is the job of everyone around you to hold you as you do that. So that's what we're really big on in the postpartum, is really holding the mothers.
That's so beautiful. I love absolutely everything that you're saying. I think it's so important. Reflecting on my own experience, I had postpartum depression and anxiety after my first
Yeah.
baby. And I think a lot of it, I mean, there was a lot to it, but I think for me, the lack of education and understanding of what I would need postpartum was huge. And so this knowledge and not only holding the mother, but this educational component that you're bringing into it as well is, I see in my view, as so important. So I
Yeah.
think it's really beautiful what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think it's our big driving force for this, is to just really support women across the whole journey, but with a big emphasis on postpartum, because that's when that transformation truly happens. And, we see women become mothers and family dynamics change. And I absolutely love the book, The Postnatal Depletion Cure, because I think it's just a really, Dr. Serelak talks about postnatal depletion and how he treats women who are 6-7 years postpartum severely depleted. And, we think, oh, we're just tired because we're mums, or, I didn't remember that because baby brain has gone on. But he looks at it as a way of, no, this woman's stores are depleted because she just wasn't cared for properly in that postpartum period, and she wasn't able to restore all of those she just wasn't able to replenish those stores after birth. So yeah, and he says a lot, if we hold the mothers, I mean, we change society essentially, and future generations if we care for the mother. So yeah, it's really important to us to support women postpartum.
So let's talk about home birth misconceptions. So, I mean, we've spoken about this already, how home birth isn't widely known, especially in the context of having a private midwife. It's often considered a radical approach to birth. So, how do you navigate and address those misconceptions about home birth, and what strategies do you employ to change those perceptions?
I think really the most important thing here comes down to education. Like you've said yourself, first of all, some people don't even know that it's an option. So, if you don't know that it's an option, then there's a big issue there straight away to begin with. I think that most people who have these kind of thoughts about home birth being radical or crazy or whatever, it comes down to the fact that they simply just don't understand it. If you don't understand the process of birth and normal physiological birth and what our body is designed and able to do in that space, then of course home birth is going to seem like a crazy radical thing to do, because birth has been made to be believed to be medicalized. There has been this big shift away from normal, natural, physiological birth to this medicalized model where a pregnant woman is seen to be someone who's sick or got something that needs to be treated in a hospital. And when you think about that, when do you go to the hospital other than when you're sick? Outside of pregnancy, nobody goes to the hospital unless they're sick. So to think about the fact that we send every single pregnant woman to the hospital to have a baby is backwards in itself, because pregnant women aren't sick. They're pregnant, and it is a normal,
Exactly.
natural, physiological state. So I think that so much of the misconception around home birth purely comes from a misunderstanding of it. I think that, like, I've always been a big advocate for the fact that there's not one size fits all, especially when it comes to pregnancy and birth. Like, what works for one woman may not work for another, and that is totally fine, and that needs to be respected. Like, I think it's important to say that women need to be confident and happy in their choices no matter what they are. So, if a woman was considering a home birth but had concerns, then my job as a midwife would be to provide her with good quality research, to provide her with education around the outcomes of home birth and its safety, and allow her the time and the space to look into it for herself and decide if that was right for her. Because, trying to push someone into a decision that they don't feel comfortable with is never going to work out well. It has to be something that sits right with them and they believe in it, because otherwise, essentially, you're setting yourself up for a fail. But I think that there's also so many amazing resources that we would point women in the direction of. Like, the Home Birth Australia website has some amazing information and statistics around home birth and stuff on it, which is a really good starting point. There's also so many amazing podcasts. One of them, of just to name one, is The Great Birth Rebellion by Melanie the Midwife, which obviously covers so many different topics in detail. But getting women to read books, to have a look at the actual research around home birth, to listen to these kinds of podcasts and make informed decisions for themselves about what they feel comfortable with when it comes to their birth. And then, at the end of the day, if all else fails, I've pulled a few people into the home birth train by just showing them some beautiful home birth videos. And then they are like, oh, no, you've got me good. So, yeah, it's actually funny. One of my friends did hypnobirthing classes with me when she was pregnant with her fourth baby, and she'd had 3 babies in a hospital before. And she did the hypnobirthing classes with me, and she called me at 28 weeks pregnant. She's like, so I think I'm going to have a home birth. And I was like, really? And she's like, yep, would you be my midwife? And I was like, sure. And so, yeah, she ended up having a home birth. And she's like, honestly, she goes, as soon as I watched those videos, I just couldn't get it out of my head. And I thought, I have to do that. And she's had a home birth with her fourth, and then she just had a free birth for her fifth baby because I wasn't at home. So she didn't have a midwife that she trusted to support her. So, yeah, you just never know what might get people in the end.
Yeah, and it's not like I've interviewed people before and they've said something similar. The episode actually that came out today with Ali, she was saying how massive the mindset shift was from thinking she was going to go through private obstetric care to then choosing a home birth, all because a friend had shared her home birth video on Instagram. Like
That's
it's
awesome.
yeah, so that totally changed her journey and all for the
Yeah.
better. Like it's a pretty great story. But yeah, so and you know what? I mean, you mentioned the Great Birth Rebellion podcast. I love that podcast. I recommend it to everyone who will listen to me. I think it's great. But also you mentioned like watching home birth videos and those sorts of things. That can also be really useful for the partner to try
Yes,
and understand where you're coming from and your perspective. If you're wanting a home
definitely.
birth and your partner is just doesn't have that education understanding behind them
Yep.
to understand your perspective, showing them home birth videos, or I've had people in the past mention the birth time documentary as well, could be a really great resource.
Yes,
But
that's
a
beautiful.
video
Yep.
a video could be great or a movie could be great versus books and podcasts. It just depends on the person. But there are so many resources out there
For sure.
now where you can learn about home birth. It's really great. So I talked a little bit about how minimizing medical interventions can positively influence the overall birthing experience. So we have gone into that quite a lot, but is there anything you want to add about how a physiological labor and birth can lead to a more positive birth experience?
Well, I just think anytime there's intervention, I mean, anytime that I've spoken to someone who's had some sort of intervention or cared for someone who had previous intervention in their birth, anytime I speak to them, it's this almost a common theme of them thinking that their body had failed in some way. So, their body couldn't have done it without that intervention. Their body was taking too long, and so they needed X, Y, and Z. And I think if they're living with that sort of belief, then that confidence and that trust in their body is gone. They just don't have that. So I think when we think about intervention, we also have to think about the impact that that has on how a woman sees herself and sees her body. And I have a beautiful experience in the hospital actually with an incredible obstetrician, and there was a woman who was having her first baby and she had been pushing for around 2 hours. And I mean, standard practice is at that 2 hour mark, it's pretty much someone will come in and recommend that in some way or another it is sped up, whether that's cesarean or an instrumental. That's a case by case thing. But the obstetrician on that day, there was this talk about the woman needing a vacuum because it had been 2 hours. And he said, I don't need to go in there and put a vacuum on that baby's head and make that woman think that she wasn't able to do this on her own. He said her baby is safe and she is safe, so she can keep pushing. And I have so much respect for him. And it was in that moment that I realized it's not just about getting this baby out and job well done, everyone. It's about, is this absolutely necessary? Is this life or death? Because if it isn't, and we're doing interventions just because, the effect that that has is long standing. I mean, women will carry this forever. They carry this through until their second, third, fourth birth. And I've seen it with women 5 years down the track who still believe that their body wasn't able to do it, that they needed help. So I think we just have to be really mindful of that and minimize intervention when it's not a life or death situation.
I think that's incredibly powerful. I think that is unique that the obstetrician did
Oh,
that.
yes.
And yeah,
One
it's
in a million.
wonderful. Yeah.
One in a
That it's
million.
unique. And I
Yeah.
love that that is just had such a lasting impact for you. And
Yeah.
it's so, so true.
It is.
Um,
And yeah, she pushed her baby out. I mean, she did it all on her own. So she just needed time
yeah, and confidence probably
and
as well.
confidence. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
So we have spoken a little bit about the rising birth trauma rates. How do you think a home birth can promote a positive birth experience? And like I said, we have spoken a little bit about this before. So is there anything you want to add to that discussion?
I think when we spoke about it earlier, I think we covered anything. I guess what we said earlier, if we look at birth trauma and what leads to trauma, it's the common themes, and this is really well documented, are coercion, intervention, lack of consent, feeling powerless, not heard, not supported. So I think to improve that, we just need to listen to women and trust women. At the end of the day, I think that's exactly what it boils down to. We trust them and we place them as the expert and we support any decision that they make and build that confidence for them to make those decisions. And in turn, we will improve birth trauma.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And is there anything you would like to add on that one, Talia?
I agree with Jacinta fully there. And I think, the only other thing that I would add is just for me, the fact that we have a 1 in 3 women experiencing birth trauma. I just think that number is not okay in any standard, anywhere, at any time. I think that if anyone thinks that it's okay that 1 in 3 women are walking away from their birth traumatized, has to take a serious look at that. It's appalling, first of all.
Isn't it
And
crazy? Like
Yeah.
it's
it's
absolute
crazy.
madness.
It is.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like I think if you looked at that statistic in any other circumstance, people getting a blood test, if 1 in 3 people walked away from a blood test traumatized and needing counseling from it, like wouldn't there be like some
Yeah.
people going, hang on a minute, what's happening here that's so wrong with this system, And I
Yeah.
think that like it just highlights the fact that we are doing this wrong. Like
Yeah.
what is happening currently is wrong because it's not working. What's happening is not working, so it needs to change so that women can stop being a part of this horrific statistic because it's birth should be normal and natural and beautiful, not traumatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And even just to add to that, not only is it totally appalling that 1 in 3 women experience birth trauma, but the statistics on obstetric violence are 1 in 10. And that
Yeah.
is also
Yeah.
like,
Ugh,
that's
that's just a whole other
disgusting.
kettle of fish.
Yeah, yeah. So, in a broader context, then, how do you see your role as private midwives contributing to the advocacy of home births? And what changes would you like to see in the, I guess, perception, but also the accessibility of home births in the future?
I think that the more private midwives that we have and that start emerging, I think the more that women will start to see that they have options outside of the traditional system. Like we have spoken about prior, it comes back to the fact that a lot of women don't actually know about this option for care. And, I think that as private midwives working in collaboration with one another, with other midwives and with other care providers, it means that we build a strong supportive network. And by doing that, we can show the governing bodies that we want to be different and we want to be we want change, that we're not happy to stay in this broken system that's failing women on so many levels. I just think that there should absolutely be more government funding for women when it comes to
Mm.
home birth and private midwifery care. I think that it's unfair that women who choose to do this as an option are expected to pay out of pocket, but they would get it all for free if they went to the hospital. And the craziest part about that is that it actually costs the government more to pay for a woman to birth in a hospital than it does to allow that woman to choose a private midwife and then fund that private midwifery care. So, again, just coming back to the fact that it's just a flawed system, and Jacinta and I are super passionate about this, and we will continue to advocate for, and support, hopefully one day women having publicly funded home birth through private midwife of their choice, because yes, there is some positive changes currently at the moment where they're looking into publicly funded home birth in the Sunshine Coast Hospital. They're about to start a trial. But, again, the selection criteria around that for the women who will be accepted into that program is so stringent that it's going to be such a minor percentage of women who are actually even eligible in the first place. And they still have to go through the hospital, so it's limited to how many midwives are working in that model of care in the hospital. Currently, the interstate models that are around that are publicly funded, the ability for women to actually get into that model, the criteria is so strict that they make it almost impossible for someone to get in unless they have basically no risk factors at all. So, again, it comes back to these women who have had an emergency Caesar in the hospital who want to have a VBAC, they're automatically excluded. So where does that leave them? You know what I mean? It shouldn't be, it should just be an available choice that educated adult women can go, hey, this is my body, this is my baby, this is what I'm okay with, this is the risk that I'm willing to take, and I'm happy with that risk. I've done my research, and this is how I choose to spend the money towards my birth. And they should be given, this is your allowance. You get to choose what you do with that, whether you birth in a private hospital, whether you birth in a public hospital, whether you birth at home, whatever that choice is, the woman should be given that choice. That should not be the choice of the government.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I'm glad that they're looking at publicly funded home birth programs in the different states, but I couldn't agree with you more on the stringent criteria that women are required to follow to get into those programs. And not only that, but the programs are often off the hospital procedures and protocols, which
Correct.
aren't backed up by the most current research. And
Yes.
so it's I think I read one of the criteria the other day. I can't remember which state it was. It might have been the ACT, and they were still required to dilate 1 centimeter every hour. And I
Wow.
just thought, oh, come on, guys, that is so outdated.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's hard. So I'm with you. I'm glad that you're so passionate about spreading the word about home birth. I really hope that there is change and that there is a more accessible government funded program available to women. Maybe one day, but I think the advocacy we're just going to advocate hard for change, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So drawing upon your extensive experience in supporting families through, pregnancy, birth and postpartum, if you could offer one piece of advice to women and families, what would that be? And additionally, can you recommend any specific resources like books, websites or support networks that you find particularly valuable?
It's so hard to think of one
I
piece of
know.
advice. Just one. I think it would be, for me, come back to your inner knowing always. I think always come back to what your intuition, instinct, your body, come back to that. If something feels off, it's off. If something feels right, it's right.
I love that.
Yeah. I think mine would just have to be trust that your body as a woman, you were actually born to grow a baby and give birth and be a mother. That's I think that people underestimate their ability and the power of their body and their mind. And I think that women just need to trust that more, because this is literally what you were born to do.
Yeah. And I think for resources, I think Rachel Reed's Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage up there at the very top. And all the postnatal, I love the first 40 days and Village for Mama. It just has all of that information that we were talking about postpartum on how to bring your body back to balance and how to nurture your body and have people around you support you in that. So yeah, that would be my top book recommendations.
I think for me, if people were questioning or doubting whether it's home birth or just birthing, their ability to birth in general, I think that the Birth Time film, just watching that, is an absolute game changer, because you'll see what happens in the system and the difference that you can make if you are educated and informed and empowered. So yeah, that would be my first go and watch that, and then let's go from there.
Yeah. And I'll link all of those resources in the show notes as well. And Talia, you mentioned, I'll link the Great Birth Rebellion podcast in the show notes.
Yes.
And I'll also link, you mentioned a book, The Postpartum Depletion Cure by Dr. Oscar Serelak.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
So I'll link that one as well. So for listeners who want to get in touch, how can they reach you?
So probably the best way is to go to our website, which is www.avenirlifemidwifery.com.au. All of our services, our pricing, everything about our midwives and our allied health professionals is all on the website. We also have an Instagram page and a Facebook page, but all of our contact details, email, phone numbers, and everything is all on our website. So yeah, anyone, you can find us on Google. If you have questions or anything like that, feel free to give Jacinta or I a call. We'd love to talk to you and run you through, what we offer and why we do what we do. But yeah, we're just excited for the future and to help women through this journey.
Yeah, and congratulations on opening, your holistic midwifery practice. I think it's amazing, and all the services you provide go above and beyond what I expected. So I love that. I will link everything in the show notes for people who want to get in touch. And thank you so much, both of you, Jacinta and Talia, for coming on the show.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Mama Village. Check out the show notes for a link to the Instagram page where I upload pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and motherhood resources. If you would like to share your story on the podcast, please send an email to the.mamavillage@outlook.com. That's the.mamavillage@outlook.com. If you like the show, please subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform. I will speak to you all in next week's episode.